Hey everyone, welcome back. I am really sorry, but I started without you. I apologize, but you've sort of missed the beginning of this piece. I have a very good reason for that, and that is because I spent about an hour and 10 minutes doing this, and that just seems way too long for a YouTube video. I know some people might find that sort of a little ridiculous, spending over an hour on a piece like this, but if you've seen some of my other videos and you've maybe heard me talk about this before, I don't paint really fast. I take my time. So that is why I decided to skip the beginning of this, and I've also jumped ahead just a tiny bit a little later on. But I do spend a lot of time on these pieces, and over an hour, no one's going to watch that. So I've also speeded this up just a tiny little bit. I hope that's okay. I think you can still sort of see everything that I'm doing. I wanted to use this video anyway, even though you don't get to see sort of the full version. Well, first of all, I thought this actually turned out pretty well. I'm kind of happy with it, so I wanted to show you. But I also thought that this would be a really good video to talk about mainly two things. One, which is composition, and also talk about color choices or color combinations. And I think we should start with that. I'm just going to tell you which colors I'm using on this piece. I'm using brass, of course, not really a big surprise. Then I have used two Copics, which is black, and the other one is BG09, which is blue-green. I think that name is actually a little... It doesn't really fit because it's not really very green. It's more blue, but still a nice color. I've also used two Ranger colors, and that is cranberry and rust. Now I've picked these colors because some of them are not colors that I would usually choose together, and that is mainly the blue and the rust. The rust is this sort of soft, really pretty brown color, and I normally wouldn't pick this with blue. I also don't use blue very often, but I have sort of gotten very good at lately picking color combinations that I normally wouldn't pick. When I first started inks, I most pieces I just did one color, and on occasion I picked two. And when I started getting a bit more bold and using maybe 3 or 4 colors together in a piece, I would always sort of pick the safe. It would be the safe choice. I would pick the colors that would sort of very naturally go together. If I used blue, then I would use it with purple because they just match each other. And I got a little tired of it eventually. I wanted to try something different. So I started getting a lot better at picking these sort of colors that might not be most people's first choice. And it's so much fun. On occasion you pick some colors and it really doesn't work, but a lot of the times those unusual color combinations actually turn out really good, and also creating new colors while you're working with it. So this is, I'm really happy with this. The cranberry is I don't really know how to describe that color. It's not really red and it's not really purple. It's something in between, and that obviously works really, really well with rust. But I think for me, the rust and the blue that's an odd couple. So I'm really happy I chose this. I've also used the black, which is not sort of the main color on this piece, but it's really, this piece sort of needed a really dark color and something that would give it a lot of contrast. So odd color combinations. I don't know if this is really, really odd, but it's not one that I would usually pick. And maybe this is inspiration for those of you who usually pick the safer colors. Maybe give yourself a challenge and pick out a color combination that you normally wouldn't choose. A piece I just finished recently, I don't actually have a video on it, but I've just posted a picture on it on the Alcohol Ink Art community group on Facebook if you want to see it. But I wanted to do something spring colors. And then I obviously chose orange, yellow, and green, which it can't be any more spring than that. And the green was sort of a real grass green. But when I was sort of looking at these colors before I started, I thought this is the safe choice. This is the colors that you would normally just pick together. And so I put back the grass green and I replaced it with moss. I'm a big fan of moss. It's a great color, but it's not really sort of a spring kind of green. It's a bit, it's very soft and a bit grayish. So it wasn't really an actual spring color, but it turned out so well, that color combination. So maybe you'll find a little inspiration in doing that, picking some color combinations that you normally wouldn't choose. It is so much fun. I actually have sort of an idea for one of my next pieces, to use orange and purple. I don't think I have ever used those two colors together, but I think maybe it might actually work. So that's something I'm gonna do on one of my next pieces. We'll see if it works out or not. I think that was enough about the color combination. Try something different. It's fun. I'm gonna leave the colors that I've used in this piece for you in the description down below the video. Now on this piece, I've gone back to my little air puffer hand blower thingy. I never actually remember what it's called, but I've started to really, really like it when I'm doing these very abstract wispy pieces. It's very unpredictable when you use this. I really, really like it. I've used it a lot more lately, and it's so much fun. I'm also on this one, I'm not using my new Remington hair dryer. I do like the new hair dryer. A lot of people have asked me about it, and it is actually really good. But the cool air setting on it isn't as cool as I would like it to be. And for this piece, I'm using not all that much ISO on this. I didn't want it to dry too fast. So I found my other hair dryer, the hair dryer that I actually use to dry my hair. I've never used this with my inks before, but the cool air setting on this one, it's actually a little more cold. So I thought I would just give it a try. It's sort of like a tiny little travel size hair dryer, and it actually works really well. It's not too powerful. So if anyone's sort of looking for a new hair dryer, those tiny little travel size ones, I think they actually work really, really well. Not too hot and not too powerful. So the Remington is still good, and I'm still going to use it. But for this piece, trying out my normal hair dryer. So also a little tip for you, if you need to get something for your inks, a hair dryer or a heat gun or whatever it is, because so many people ask me about what brand, and I think you don't need to go out and buy the most expensive hair dryer or heat gun you can find. Sometimes the really cheap stuff is really, really good. I think my heat gun, which works really well, it has many different settings. It wasn't very expensive. My Remington hair dryer cost a little bit more, but still sort of on the cheaper end. And this little travel hair dryer that I have, I don't remember what I paid for it, but it was cheap. It was very, very cheap, and it works really, really well. So you don't have to spend a fortune on hair dryers or heat guns. It's not necessary. You try something cheap and see if it works. Anyway, back to the colors. Very, very happy about this color choice. It is. There's a lot of color in it, but it's sort of soft, which I really like. The blue is sort of what stands out. We should talk a little bit about composition. This piece, I wanted it to be. I did 2 other videos with pieces that are sort of a little similar style-wise to this. One, I think, is video number 12, and the other one, I think it's 17 or 18. I don't actually remember, but you can go check it out. Those are also very, very abstract pieces and very colorful pieces. I wanted this to be sort of similar style-wise, but I wanted this to be a bit softer, both in color choice, but also sort of with the composition. I wanted this to be a tiny bit more wispy. So I do have more color in the center of the piece, and then making it more and more wispy out towards the edges. I usually always have a lot of negative space. I never fill out the entire piece of paper. That's just sort of my thing. That's what I like to do. But on these sort of really more abstract pieces, I still want negative space, but I want to fill it out a little bit more. And on this one, I sort of had a plan on where I wanted all of this to be on the paper. And when this piece was finished, I actually wasn't 100% happy with it. But that's the way it is with ink. Even if you have a plan, inks have a life of their own. And so even though I wasn't completely happy with it, I do actually like where this all turned out on the paper. Composition is tricky. Sometimes what you do on a piece just works and it's completely perfect. Other times you might think you're doing the same thing and it ends up just weird looking. So composition is so tricky. I think how you want it to end out placed on the paper has a lot to do with what sort of technique you're using. For a really long time, all my pieces started at the bottom left corner and went up to the top right corner. completely diagonal, same direction every time, and it got a little boring. It does work sometimes, but it got a little boring for me, and so I started experimenting a bit more with direction. That is sort of, I think, no matter how you want it, if you want it to fill out the paper from one corner to the other, you need some sort of direction, and you need sort of some sort of flow and movement, and that is actually what will help you composition wise. You can make something that is very diagonal from one corner to the other. It can end up really boring, but depending on the technique you're using, very simple composition can be very, very interesting. But if the composition is simple, you have to add the interesting part. You have to add that sense of movement and direction. You don't have to sort of move your ink out in 10 different directions, but have to have some sort of a flow so that a very simple composition will become interesting to look at. I see a lot of pieces sometimes, and I'm a victim of this myself. When I first started, I tried to create something interesting. I would start with a lot of color right in the center of the piece, and then I would start moving it out in like 5 or 6 different directions, and it just ended up looking like, you know, fingers or arms or legs, and it was just way too much. If you can see on this piece, I sort of have a dark center right in the middle of the piece. On the right hand side, I'm actually moving out towards both corners with a little bit of negative space. Now I could do the same thing on the left side of the paper, but instead I'm going to keep it more together and sort of, I'm going to curl it a little just towards one corner. And that will give it a lot of movement and a lot of directions without actually ending up with those, you know, arms and legs and fingers. So composition, it's tricky. And there's no right or wrong, really. Sometimes what you do works, and sometimes it just doesn't. It's the same for me too. But my best advice is try to create that sense of flow and movement in your piece. You don't need to go in 10 different directions, but you need different, tiny little different things that will make it look interesting. I don't really know if I'm explaining this very well, but like on this piece, the composition is actually quite simple, really, if you sort of break it down. What makes this interesting is like I'm working basically just in 3 different directions. On the right side towards both corners, on the left side down towards one corner. What gives it that flow and movement is all the little wispy bits. Some go in one direction and they're a little bit bigger. Right next to it, it's a slightly different direction and it's a bit smaller. That is sort of the way I build up my pieces. And well, again, this is just my personal opinion, and what I like. We all like different things, but my best advice, even if you're keeping it very simple, create that movement and that flow. It's sometimes the tiny little things that will make a piece pop. It's the tiny little things that will make it interesting. And I think a lot of the times with composition, we try too much, we try too hard, and it can end up being looking a little bit messy and a little bit confusing. So the tiny things, really, the smaller details that can make your piece interesting. Oh, composition, it's tricky. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on this whole building up your piece and composition thing. Do you find it tricky, or do you sort of have your own style and your own way of creating your pieces? I think this sort of style that I'm doing here, it took me a really long time to figure out how to fill up my paper without it becoming way too much or way too confusing. My pieces were all over the place when I first started doing things like this. I think composition wise, I didn't really know what it was that I wanted. And that's also something that, you know, if you're new, it takes a little time to figure out what it is you want. I see a lot of artists that they don't have any negative space at all. They fill up the whole piece and it looks absolutely beautiful. I'm not good at that. That's not my thing. If I try to do that, it ends up like one big mess. I need that negative space to help me create that movement and flow that I like so much. So I guess my advice for you about composition, if you want to do a piece that is sort of similar to this, use those different shapes and sizes, those tiny little wispy fades, in order to create that movement and that flow, without going out in like 10 different directions on the paper. You can keep it simple and still get that sense of movement, just by using these tiny little shapes and sizes. And also, color-wise, maybe you feel a little inspired by this to try some new color combinations. Step a little out of your comfort zone. It is so much fun to pick those colors that you normally wouldn't pick. I love it. I love trying these new combinations. So much fun. I guess that's all I can think of talking about with this piece. As always, please feel free to subscribe, and if you have any questions or something you would like to say, just leave a comment. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I will be back with another video soon.